You are watching India Global with me, Parmeshwar Baba. Now, as pressure mounts on Canada to release evidence of an extraterritorial assassination on its soil, we dig deeper into what Justin Trudeau's accusations mean for India and Canada's diplomatic ties on this episode. For further clarity on whether Justin Trudeau is politicizing India-Canada ties, from Canada I have with me senior journalist Rupa Subramanya, former leader of opposition Thomas Mulcair, also joining us Dr. Michael Rubin from the American Enterprise, and senior journalist Namrata Brar will be joining us live from New York, along with Amit Barua as well. The big story this week is the downward spiral in India-Canada ties. Now, ties have hit an all-time low, with India suspending visa services for Canadians till further notice, citing operational reasons. India has also asked Canada to downsize its diplomatic staff in the country as the Canadian diplomatic presence in India exceeds that of India in Canada. Now, speaking at a press interaction on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, the Canadian Prime Minister reiterated that there are credible reasons to believe that agents of the government of India were involved in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil. Meanwhile, Khalistani extremist Hardeep Singh Nijjar was murdered in Surrey in June, as we covered. He called on the Indian government to cooperate with the investigation into the murder, adding that his government is not looking to cause problems with India. However, Justin Trudeau was forced to acknowledge what he termed as New Delhi's growing international influence as it forges stronger economic and security ties with the West. And the Narendra Modi government has dismissed Trudeau's claims as absurd and motivated, leading to reciprocal expulsions of diplomats, and India maintains that no evidence has been shared so far. Toughening its stand, India also slammed Canada for acting as a safe haven for extremists. Right, joining me live currently, Rupa Subramanya, senior journalist. Rupa, now the big question is, if Justin Trudeau has the evidence, shouldn't he be sharing it? Take us through the reactions on Ground Zero.
Thanks for having me on the show. So what's going on here is that, there's been calls by the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, less than 24 hours after Justin Trudeau broke these allegations, made these allegations on the floor of the House of Commons on the opening day of Parliament. The leader of the opposition requested that Justin Trudeau provide more evidence that to back up the claim that Indian agents were behind the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and so it's been and he's also been criticized for making these allegations without providing any proof so far, and he was pointedly asked by a journalist on the sidelines of the UN meeting yesterday whether he would provide evidence to back up his claims, and he just deflected. He didn't answer the question and just gave a boilerplate response about how he believes in the importance of the rule of law and a rules-based system. I don't know. There's still an RCMP investigation going on, so I don't know if it will actually see this evidence at any point. But I just hope that whatever Justin Trudeau has in his possession, it's a smoking gun, because you're going after a major democratic ally. It's a very important partner for the West in the Indo-Pacific to counter China in that region. India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and to make these explosive allegations with very little proof or no proof, and I hope that's not the case. I hope he really has something, but we'll only know that once the investigation is done.
Indeed. Also joining us live from New York at the moment, senior journalist Namrata Brar. Namrata, it's always great to have you back on NDTV. Now, Trudeau has tried to rope in the G7 and Five Eyes countries to put pressure on India, but he's only received mild support so far. But significant words from the US NSA on Trudeau's allegations against India. In fact, Jake Sullivan said, there's not some special exemption you get for actions like this. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Biden administration handles this situation.
Yes, it certainly is a quagmire for the United States, given the extent and the warmth of the US-India relationship, which has skyrocketed in terms of closeness across defense and business in recent years. I just want to make a point on 3 counts on this issue. Number 1 is the fact that you have the fact that an international court of law will bring all this evidence to light. Now, whether or not Canada can prove this electronic evidence, which they certainly might possess and they might have, let's give them the clarity of thought there. But can this be proven? Because wiretapping on diplomats is also comes with its own set of laws. So will that certainly see the light of court? We don't know. Second, the fact that US in the past has also had issues, such as its own killing of its Saudi Arab killing of Jamal Khashoggi, a US permanent resident, also a journalist in Turkey. We saw the aftermath of what happened there in 2018. It did criticize it, went after it, but now is signing a Saudi Arab defense treaty currently as we speak, or is in the process of making a pact. So does US play a black and white game or more of a gray diplomatic checkerboard game, which has been the way that US self-serving interests and international politics have played out? That's a big question. And thirdly, yes, there is this Khalistan element which has been there in Canada. Remember, there are votes as well. 6% of the Canadian Parliament is the vote of the NDP, the New Democratic Party, which is controlled by Jagmeet Singh. And that is a real political compulsion for Trudeau, which has to have its support, given the fact that Justin Trudeau is falling in the polls, is nearly at 30%, and it does need this faction's vote. So those 3 angles will come in together, and we will have to see whether this is a short-term call, whether this is a message being sent out on this particular killing, but does not extend to a complete fallout of diplomacy between the nations.
Indeed, lots to unpack there. Thanks so much, Namrata, for taking us through those 3 crucial points. Amit Barua, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Now, what do Trudeau's accusations mean for wider diplomatic ties, especially in terms of immigration and trade talks?
I just wanted to say that, these are very serious allegations that have been leveled. And this really marks a new low in Indo-Canada relations. After the expulsion, tit-for-tat expulsion of diplomats, one would have hoped that, this matter would have rested there. But clearly it has not. And the fact that India has chosen to suspend visa services marks an escalation in this diplomatic war, if you might call it, which has broken out between India and Canada. Remember, this is a friendly country. This is not a Pakistan or a China that we are dealing with. We have tens and thousands and lakhs of students and residents and, immigrants going to this country. So I do hope that, the escalation that has happened, good sense will prevail. We've had a situation where Canadian national security officials were here before the G20 meeting to discuss, this episode. This is what the Canadian media has been reporting. So my, 2 bits on this would be that better sense should prevail. Calmer heads should be brought into play. And of course, there is a bit of a competition as to who is the closer ally to the United States. And there is also information that the intelligence has actually come from one of the Five Eyes countries. So if that is the case, then it would be better if, if saner voices would prevail in both governments. And it's absolutely correct to say that if evidence was available or is available, it should be presented. Not just to the government of India, but now it's time to put it in the public domain, because the public has got aware of this. Because at the end of the day, what happens when a war breaks out? I've lived in Pakistan as the Hindus correspondent, so I know what visa wars are all about. So the bottom line is that ordinary people should not suffer in this game. What has happened, if it has happened, Trudeau has been very careful in the language that he used, but it's a very serious incident and it needs to be investigated, and it needs to be investigated in a manner where everybody is satisfied. That's unlikely to happen, but an open, credible investigation is a must into these allegations. And also, we do know that these countries, whether it's Canada or Australia or other Western countries, we know not just the Khalistanis, but people from the LTT were allowed free rein in this country. So what happens is that if you allow extremist groups or extremist leaders to run riot, there are obviously going to be concerns. But at the same time, it should be a calibrated effort. It should be done in a deliberate manner. And I do hope that the government of India will rethink its policy of escalation. If there are numbers which they want to reduce from the Canadian side, that is indeed the government of India's prerogative.
Let's also just bring in
But
Rupa
suspension
Subramania
of visa services is not their prerogative.
As we wrap, Rupa, now this row undoubtedly will have ramifications for Canada's position globally. But if you could just tell us about Trudeau's internal compulsions as well domestically.
Well, the speculation is that he's basically done this for domestic political reasons, principally to placate the Sikh constituency, which is an important constituency here in Canada. It's possible that he did not want to lose the vote to Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the New Democrats. The New Democratic Party, although elections are 2 years away, but he's been tanking in the polls recently. He's being hammered away by the opposition for things like inflation and housing. There's a housing crisis in this country. And the economy has actually stagnated. It hasn't grown since 2018 or 2019 for 5 years. And if this continues for another 5 years, we are looking at, possibly a lost decade here in Canada. So, there are some basic bread and butter issues here in Canada that Trudeau had to deal with, or he's not been dealing with it. And so a lot of people, have been speculating here that perhaps by making these explosive allegations, it would change the conversation to something else. He's also faced quite a bit of heat in not really taking the Chinese interference in Canada's electoral system seriously. He was eventually forced to recognize the importance of the issue and constitute an inquiry into the matter, but ended up appointing a childhood friend of his as the investigator, and then that person had to resign. So. There are a lot of moving parts here. I'm not saying that Canadian intelligence doesn't have it right, and neither am I saying that Indian intelligence doesn't have it right on Hardeep Singh Nijjar. I'm just saying that the manner in which Justin Trudeau went about making these allegations against a major ally, a fellow democracy, and not a tin pot dictatorship, I think he could have handled it better.
Well, thank you so much, Rupa Subramania, for joining us, and Namrit Abrar and Amit Barua for joining us on this episode of India Global and offering your analysis and insight. But as pressure mounts on Canada to release evidence of this claim that they've made, the bombshell claim made on the first day of Parliament, to better understand what the opposition in Canada is saying, we have with us Honourable Thomas Mulcair, former leader of the opposition in Canada, who's currently a professor at the University of Montreal and a political commentator. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on NDTV. Now, Justin Trudeau's polling numbers are pretty bad right now. His sliding popularity in polls is evident. And with a backdrop of a rising cost of living crisis, as Rupa Subramania was just pointing out, would you say the sudden escalation due to the domestic compulsions, it's because of the domestic compulsions that Justin Trudeau faces?
Well, Parmeshwar, that is a very valid question, and it is one that is being asked a lot here in Canada. Because when Mr. Trudeau made this announcement on Monday, it was the opening day of Parliament, and of course, he was expecting tough questioning. So when you let off a bombshell like this, you suck out all of the air of the opposition parties, and this becomes the only issue. And so it was a bombshell announcement. Mr. Trudeau did it in a very theatrical manner, and it caught all of the attention of every microphone and camera in Canada. And it almost distracted from the fundamental nature of the discussion that has to be had about diaspora communities and how the Canadian government has reacted in the past and what's expected in the international order and respecting the rule of law, both here at home and abroad. So the very strong reaction that we've been hearing from the Indian government was not unexpected. Given the gravity of what is being said. But what's interesting is that what we've been getting back and the information that is coming out now tends to show that the government of India is saying, you've been mollycoddling terrorists and people who are dangerous for us. And nobody seems, on the public record at least, and in the interviews that are being reported privately, to deny that the Indian government might have had a hand. So it's a very delicate and serious situation that deserves proper consideration from two countries that are in the Commonwealth, have a long history together, working together, and both respect democracy and the rule of law, although that can sometimes be tense on both sides.
Right, it was a bombshell announcement indeed, Mr. Malkeh. But now as pressure mounts on Canada to release evidence, media reports actually indicate that the government is believed to be in possession of intelligence linking Indian officials and diplomats to the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So why isn't it being shared?
Well, that's another very good question. So the information that you've just correctly quoted is in the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's website, and online today, and I'm sure in the reports. It seems quite detailed, and it seems obviously to have been given to them by a government source. CBC belongs to the Canadian government. It's state television, state-owned television. They'll try to argue that they don't have any special bias or connection to the government, but having been in a party other than Mr. Trudeau's Liberal Party, I can tell you that sometimes that can be strained somewhat. So yes, I mean, they were given obvious information. It does appear to be quite deep. At the beginning, the Five Eyes allies, so Canada is in a group called the Five Eyes. That would be Great Britain, United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. There seemed to be a rather tepid response to Canada's initial announcement about this, although now they seem to be, perhaps having shared some of the intelligence available, they do seem to be taking the side of, look, this is not possible. We have a way of talking to each other and working with each other. This can't be part of the game plan. An extrajudicial killing in another Commonwealth country that would have had any sort of connection to another government. So that's where things stand right now. I think that Mr. Trudeau has been trying to lower the temperature after that big announcement on Monday that he didn't try to hold back on. And when he was in New York, for example, this week, he was saying, well, I'm not going to say anything more about the information we have, but clearly somebody in his government has been leaking it because this wasn't discovered walking around. It's obviously something that comes from the government.
Well, Mr. Malkeh, thank you so much for joining us on NDTV with your insight. Currently on the broadcast, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, Michael Rubin, is also with us, as signs indicate that fraught relations between India and Canada are heading further south. Thanks so much, Michael Rubin, for joining us on NDTV. Now, the developments lately are being watched closely by Beijing and Moscow and the world over. But do you think this row will make Washington turn its back on India?
I don't think this row will make Washington turn its back on India. Frankly, India is too important. And the other important aspect is the facts don't appear to be on Canada's side. Remember, when there was the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi dissident in Turkey, the Turks provided the evidence immediately. Justin Trudeau has been unable to provide any evidence, and no one here in Washington, knowing him as well as we do, is willing to take him at his word.
Right, so while you don't think Washington will turn its back on India, you think if Canada continues to issue strong statements and goes on to directly accuse India, it'll present a unique challenge to Western governments, especially the United Kingdom and Australia?
Well, it absolutely does provide a challenge. And if there are fingerprints on this, it becomes an issue. But at the same time, there's two sides to every story. When it comes to the situation of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, he wasn't simply a plumber any more than Osama bin Laden was a construction engineer. The fact of the matter is Hardeep Singh Nijjar had a great deal of blood on his hands, and Canada should explain first and foremost why they were embracing and sheltering someone who came to Canada under false pretenses.
Right, no doubt this could have been handled better. But Michael, you believe Canada serves as an example for the Indian government to emphasize that it won't back down on issues related to national security and that it won't submit to Western bullying?
Well, absolutely. Look, when we talk about counterterrorism cooperation between the West and India, we in the West need to recognize that means not Indian blind support for whomever the Americans or Canadians consider terrorists, but also the United States and Canada need to do a much better job of understanding India's security concerns, especially when it comes to very real terrorism from some militants in the Sikh community. It's also important to recognize that we're doing no favors to the Sikh community because the Khalistan extremists don't represent mainstream Sikhism. The Canadian Sikhs are saying this. The American Sikhs are saying this. It's time we stop being so arrogant, stop navel gazing, and recognize that, it's time to listen to Delhi on this.
Right, thanks for joining us on NDTV, Michael. It's always insightful to hear your analysis.
Thank you.
Well, from calling Prime Minister Narendra Modi back in 2021 for COVID vaccines, to alleging India's involvement in the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has come full circle, marking a new low in India-Canada ties. Here's our report.
India-Canada ties at an all-time low, with India conveying its concerns over Khalistani activities in Canada to Trudeau on the sidelines of the G20 summit. Over the last 2 weeks, through various tit-for-tat moves, the relationship has spiraled down, with India suspending visa services in Canada.
Our High Commission and consulates are temporarily unable to process visa applications.
While India rejects the charges made by Trudeau, Canada seems to be sticking to its guns, with the allegations that India was involved in Hardeep Singh Nijjar's killing.
There are credible reasons to believe that agents of the government of India were involved in the killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil.
And the Five Eyes are playing mediator, expressing concern but talking to both sides.
I firmly reject the idea that there is a wedge between the U.S. and Canada. We have deep concerns about the allegations, and we would like to see this investigation carried forward.
Going back in time, it may be recalled that Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, the then Canadian Prime Minister, had refused the extradition request of Khalistani terrorist Dalvinder Singh Parmar in 1982. Parmar was accused of killing 2 police officers in Punjab, and the Canadian response to the Khalistani militancy was criticized by India, including by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Cut to 1985, Canada was hit by a major act of terrorism when Sikh militant organization Babbar Khalsa orchestrated the bombing of Air India Kanishka in June 1985, resulting in 331 civilian deaths, most of them Canadians. Investigations revealed that Dalvinder Singh Parmar, who headed the Babbar Khalsa in Punjab, had masterminded the bombing. In 1998, India conducted its historic Pokhran nuclear tests. In tandem with the US, Canada recalled its High Commissioner to India following the tests. In 2018, India was furious when Jaspal Atwal, convicted of attempting to assassinate an Indian cabinet minister in 1986, was invited to dine with Trudeau, even though the invitation was later rescinded. In 2020, Trudeau pledged support for rights of protesting Indian farmers and expressed concerns about Indian government's response to the protests. In the wake of that show of support, he was accused by India of inciting extremists. There seems to be no end in sight to this saga. The question is, with elections round the corner in both the countries, will diplomacy halt this worrying trend? With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report, NDTV.
Well, that's all we could pack on this edition of India Global. Thank you so much for watching and investing your time. We'll be back next week. Do stay tuned.